Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 3PGC webinar. The 3PGC, or Three Principles Global Community, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. Today, our webinar is with Dr. Mark Howard, and Dr. Mark Howard is the founder of the Three Principles Institute in Burlingame, California. He's recognized as one of the pioneers who first brought the three principles into the field of psychology. He's developed and implemented a trainer of trainer program in the UK. Since 1982, Dr. Howard has been teaching the principles to private clients, families, business professionals, mental health practitioners, and life coaches. Dr. Howard continues to mentor and coach health professionals in the three principles. He's dedicated his life to bringing peace, well-being, and happiness to humankind. I love that. So thank you so much for the generosity of your time for doing this, Mark, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. That was quite an introduction. Hope I can live up to it today. Well, it's nice to be with all of you. So I thought I would speak a little bit and check in with you all and see if you have any questions or anything you want to share today. But I did want to speak to the hope of the principles, the understanding of the principles for humankind, you know. In the last several years, as I've talked about the principles at conferences and so forth, it's really come from this feeling of the hope they provide for us. So I thought I'd spend a little time there and then check in. And then I got a couple of points I want to make. So check in after my first point and then see if there's time to make the second point. But that's my theme for today, and hopefully that will work well. But being given our group numbers and so forth, I really love to hear from you too. And I love hearing and hearing your questions or thoughts and speaking to those. But if we, look at these spiritual principles, mind, thought, and consciousness, I really see them in terms of being hopeful for our world, and us living together more in cooperation and in generosity and love and understanding. And I think just some little insights into the nature of these principles for us help us along that direction. So, when you look at us all being part of this spiritual source, which Sid calls mind, that we're all a part of that energy. It really is that we are the same. We're connected to one another spiritually. And we are all the same spiritual source, as he talks about in his seminars or in some of his writings. And that's very hopeful, I mean, he always says it's ridiculous to think that we're not different when you look at ourselves physically, of course, And he says in one recording, you have to follow the laws of nature when you're in your physical form, right? So we do look different physically from one another. And we are also psychologically different from one another because we have the principles of thought and consciousness to use our way. And no matter how close you were to your siblings or your family, you really have a different way of going about life, given the way you're using these beautiful capacities to create your moment-to-moment experience of life. And I think that understanding of one another really is hopeful for us being able to look at one another with understanding and with cooperation and with generosity. Because you see, everybody's, going about life the same way. We're all here using the principles to form a reality we're living in. And the way we act in life comes from that. And once you really see that with an understanding, a realization, an insight, it really calms down your mind in terms of being judgmental or having, opinions or negative opinions of other people. How could anybody be any different than the level at which they're thinking? And particularly that they don't even understand that it's their thinking that has something to do with the way they're living, right? So I just want to share with you the story of my progression in that to help you see what the hope is. For me, I was raised in the era of the 1950s, and being raised as a man, I kind of caught on to beliefs that my way of going about life was the right way. I was a good person and all of that, but as I was growing up, I was pretty argumentative. And then playing American sports, very competitive, you were always kind of trying to force your way through, the defenses of other teams, right? Whatever the sport was. So I really developed a way to look with other people and talk with other people from kind of a right way, that my way's the right way. And it was something that I took with me when I started to work at this large medical center in their psychiatry department. And this was about a year before I heard Sydney Banks. And so we would have like weekly staff meetings, and there were psychiatrists, psychologists, licensed social workers, and so forth. And people would share in these lunch meetings some way they were approaching their patients, and I would always argue because I had the right way. And I would debate them all the time. And now I got along with them, and I was really a nice guy, but I would be this way because I was thinking about how wrong their way was without any understanding at all. So then I had that evening meeting with Sydney Banks, and I really had these deep insights, and they continued to progress through the next several months as a group of us in the San Francisco Bay Area got together, and Sid came to meet with us, and we attended some of his seminars. And I started to gain this realization that we're all the same. Everyone is the same, not only same spiritual source, but living life the same way through their use of thought and consciousness to create the reality they're living with. And we're all kind of been kind of victims of the belief systems that we grew up in. As Sid says, you're born into life pure, but then you get contaminated. And I don't think he meant that negatively. He just said that, to me, I get that as we just start to pick up the level of consciousness of the people around us. And we start to form our beliefs and our ways of thinking. So we're all operating the same way. And I saw that deeply with my colleagues in the psychiatry department. And it came to me that they're doing all they can do, given the way they're thinking, to help. They're coming from their heart, just like I am, to want to help people. And they're helping through their way of thought and consciousness, their way of thinking, their best ideas about how to help people. And so it shifted me. It shifted me to a place of understanding. My heart went out to them. And I just saw them like me, wanting to help and doing all they can do given the thinking they're in. Me too. I'm doing all I could do given the thinking that I'm in. And it changed me in the way that I was with my colleagues. So it actually dropped judgmental thinking from my mind. I mean, it would show up because that was the habit, right? It would show up, but it couldn't gain any traction. It would just be there momentarily. And then it just kind of began to disappear. So what came out instead was I was generous to my colleagues. So if a psychiatrist needed some help, I offered, whereas before I wouldn't. In meetings, I was thankful to be there. So I lived in these beautiful feelings that came from insight into the nature of the principles, like you all do. This is just a story to kind of show you the hope. I don't mean it to go into a long story, but I'm kind of getting the feeling for it. So it may go a little long, but I'm not intentionally trying to make it a long story. I want you to get the feeling for this. And I wanted you to get the feeling of how when you gain an insight into the principles, you live at another level of consciousness. You live at another level of understanding. And that was the description of my living at another level of understanding. And so I was living a couple of months in the clinic that way. And then I've shared this before, but a colleague came up and said that she's noticed my change and she wanted to learn, what I was learning. So we met once a week in my office and we listened to Sydney Banks tapes that I had and read some from his Second Chance book, which was published then. And I talked to her a bit about what I was learning. Then other people in the clinic, other professionals started to come in. And other professionals asked me if I would tell them what I was learning. Some people caught on, other people said, well, this is the same thing I do, and I wondered if, so people couldn't hear it at the level that other people heard it. But it ended up that for 2 years, 8 mental health professionals met with me together once a week to listen to this understanding the best I could say it, and listen to Sydney Banks together. And that led to 2 of these psychologists forming a depression program in our clinic based on the principles. It led to the head of the whole clinic wanting to go to Sydney Banks seminars with me. And then she ran her groups, a psychiatrist, from this understanding that she was getting. So there's the hope. There's the hope that the way I see it, and this is just one short story in the very beginnings in like around 1984, that when people get just a flavor of where their experience comes from, and when people are treated with understanding and with the realizations that we're all connected to one another, and they want to hear that. They want that. That's what all of us are looking for. And this had nothing to do with me, really, honestly. It had to do with the fact that I was able to have some insights into the principles, and that just lifts your level of consciousness. So you have to live there. You have to live with this new understanding, right? But as people here in the communities and are taught, not taught, but hear people sharing with understanding for their humanness, and then they start to catch on to it, their level of consciousness lifts. They get to higher levels of consciousness. Then they get into the feelings of that. Generosity, compassion, goodwill. I mean, it drove, look at that. It drove 2 traditionally trained psychologists who were like Freudian psychologists to completely revamp a whole program based on their understanding of the principles. And that's all it was based on. So you can see the driving force of once people gain a level of understanding of these principles. It's very hopeful. It's very hopeful for the world that this can happen, that when people gain some inkling for themselves into their true nature, that they really are at another level of consciousness, which brings about more positive from a person differences that kept me from really feeling the connection to the people. I felt friendship and all of that, right? But there was still an element that wasn't inclusive of everybody, to a place where I became more inclusive of all people. That the only thing that made a sense of not being connected to someone was just the way I was thinking about their differences. And so this whole understanding around how Sid talks about us all being the same, going about life, creating a reality we're living in through thought and consciousness moment to moment, gave me a beautiful appreciation of why people are acting the way they are. And the other piece that really helped me a great deal is that people are living at their level of consciousness. Just another way of saying it. People are stuck at their level of consciousness unless they have a realization of what's creating it. There's no way people will change without a realization. So I could see that when people's behaviors were, really destructive or dysfunctional or troubling, that they must be really suffering in terms of the level of consciousness that they're living at. There's no way a person who is in beautiful feelings would live destructively in any way. So this understanding really helped me provide that understanding for a large number of people. And I think that if that continued to progress in the world, we would move from who's got the right way and the conflicts that creates in our world, from that insecure thinking from which it's based, to being more cooperative and grateful and generous and welcoming. I remember early on, George Prensky and I were talking, and he says, this understanding I'm getting to, Mark, has made me have more tolerance for people. I'm finding that I can tolerate more people. But now my understanding of it goes way beyond tolerance, because it's really truly seeing that we're connected to everyone, and we're here doing all we can do at the level of consciousness we live. And that understanding, when you give it to other people, draws people to you, draws people to it. That's what everyone's looking for, that understanding. So really, that's the hope I see, that experience of given consciousness we live in, how we're using thought and consciousness. Understanding. Puts aside your thinking, well, that other person has to get it too. Well, before I could be generous to that person, they've got to get this too. That's still coming from not really seeing this. But the minute you drop into that understanding, it doesn't matter whether the other person can live at the same level of consciousness as you. You have an understanding as to why they're not there yet. So rather than holding them to it before you're going to be generous, you're just generous because you're living at a higher level of consciousness than who's got the right way. You're living in a level of consciousness in which conflict really doesn't exist. More cooperation exists. In my training, in my clinical training program for my PhD in psychology, I remember professors sitting with me saying, and man, it's great to have competition. Competition really gets people going, Well, that's just a low level of consciousness thinking. You don't need competition for people to be at their best or work well together. In fact, competition is almost still in this thinking of who's got the right way or who's better than. But again, Sid's beautiful, beautiful experience that he shared with us tells us no one's better. If you start to get into that thinking, when I start to get that habit coming in, I just know I'm off. Because he said beautifully in his words about this, he said, no one's any holier than you. And that's a beautiful thing to see, because it doesn't matter what they're doing. They're the same spiritual source as you. And that, when you see it, helps you give understanding to the world. And as this progresses out into the world, more and more people can give understanding to one another. It would help humankind tremendously. That's the hope I see. So that's what I wanted to share with you on that piece. And just wondered if I could check in with you, see if you have any questions about that or anything you'd like to say. Bonnie, is there a way for them to let us know if they've got something to say? You just unmute yourself?
They can unmute themselves by scrolling down to the bottom left-hand corner of the screen.
That little microphone button?
Exactly. Yeah.
Just tap it.
And if you have any problems, there's a chat button on the bottom, so you can type in a question and I can read it.
Okay. Anybody have anything to share with that? Did it make sense? Bob, you got something? Wait, we got to unmute you. Hold on. I can't do it. You know that little microphone button down at the bottom?
Yeah,
There you go.
I had unmuted myself. I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah, you got it.
At any rate, what I was wondering is Sid always talked about the purity of the three principles and so forth. And then there was a period of time when all kinds of things changed. They had a fourth principle and all this stuff. And Sid kind of felt like it had evolved to something that wasn't the purity that he saw. And right now there are so many people out there sharing the principles in different ways and so forth, that I've seen some things on Facebook where people thought that we were kind of losing the purity of it and so forth. And I was just wondering how you saw the evolution of this and how you felt about that.
Well, I feel strongly about that. It's just, and I didn't plant Bob into this question. It's something that I've been reflecting on, because I've been with that history of that, Bob. I mean, do people, so if you don't mind, I'm going to just take a few minutes to get to Bob, answer for Bob's question, and share with you the understanding of this historically. So when I first heard of Sydney Banks, like around 1983, Roger Mills had been to visit him in the 70s and had lived there on Salt Spring Island, and so had George Pransky gone up to be with them. And Roger had gone to Florida in the United States and created an institute with another person. And George Pransky and Linda had stayed in San Francisco Bay Area, and that's who I met. But at that time, I was listening to Sydney Banks, and there weren't principles. So this center in Florida came up with 4 principles at the time. And then when Sid heard that, he just said, that's not what I saw. That's not principles. What you're saying are not principles, because principles would not be changing. They would be unchangeable, immutable, I guess is the word for it. So then he began to himself talk about 3 principles, these spiritual principles, to, again, get us on the right track. And then later we formed a national certification program, and we developed concepts. This is why I'm telling you the story. We all meant well, but as you can see, when you've had an insight and realization of the principles, you get an idea. You get your idea for them. And that's what we did. We got, they were nice ideas and concepts, and then we formed them into a course of 4 days that people had to go through to get certified. Now, here's the funny thing, but we didn't see it at the time, but here's the funny thing looking back at it. A half a day was devoted to the principles. The rest of the time was to our concepts. And people reacted to that. People in the community reacted to that because they were saying, you know, I can't get these concepts. What do they mean? You know, and finally Sid got wind of that, and he gathered us together in this meeting and just told us we were out to lunch, and said, this is not the principles. What you're sharing is not the principles. And then we had to drop everything we were so wedded to. Our egos were involved with that. And we had to drop all of that and become a student again. And some people didn't do that. Some people didn't like that. And a group of us, the remaining people that are out there now teaching the principles from those years, did that. So it taught me you always had to be a student. And it also taught me that we're going to always be able, the only way we're able to share something is from what we've seen. It's the only way to talk about it. Today, what I've talked with you about is just what I have seen. It's trying to stay into my feeling for the principles, but it'll come out in certain ideas. And you can't get wedded to those ideas. You can't form a program around those ideas. Because it's too far away from the source in you, the feeling in you that gave you the insight. And Sid says this too, you know, he says, don't listen to my words. Because by the time it got to his words, the feeling of him of what he was seeing was the words were a little away from that. So innocently, what I want to share with you is you find your own way. You take what's out there in the 3 principles world, these good ideas that are out there. There are some good ideas. They've come from people's insights. But you don't want to follow those concepts. You don't want to live just at the concepts. You want to take what those concepts have given you and go back inside and find your own ways. And that's what I think about it, because no one knows the principles. This is kind of more like it. This is what Sid told us all the time through his correcting us. People think they know thought, and you don't. You don't. There's so much more to see just about thought. So we don't see this. We get close. we get glimpses that are true. But that isn't all to see. And that's what I think so important for us, is that we keep dropping what we know and become a student. And so the best way to do that is keep listening to Sydney Banks and reading his works, because the purpose of his books is to wake up this knowledge in you. But it's really something to see that we don't know these principles. Really, we don't. The way I shared with them today with you is my glimpse of them. This little glimpse of this drop in the ocean, which I'm grateful to see. And I share that glimpse in the humility of it just being a glimpse. But I want to know in my heart that there's so much more to see. And it's exciting to know that, because we're all on a voyage of discovery. What is it that Sid says? Discovering our true selves, discovering our true nature. Now, I don't know what that means. I think what I take from that so far is that means finding love and understanding, finding your true essence of love and understanding, of happiness, of well-being, living in this physical world to enjoy yourself. So, what everybody is sharing out in the Three Principles community comes from these insights. So it's beautiful. You grab what touches you, and then you go within to let that form for you. Because whatever is being shared out there are glimpses of these principles. And there is so much more to see. Sid says, there's endless knowledge. There's no to the knowledge that is in our consciousness. Now, come on. I mean, I can't get my head around that. Can you? I mean, like, oh my God, like there's never an end to knowing. My little mind, Mark Howard, gets a little crazy about that. Like, oh my God, I want to know. I want to finally know, Come on, there's got to be a final knowing. But then the other part of Mark Howard, the part beyond my own thinking, is excited by that. It's like I'm like with today on this understanding of and understanding our connection to that, you'll see more. And when you see more, you at that moment you're connected to these deeper feelings in you. You feel more connected to life. You feel more connected to the world. That's the answer to the world. That's the answer to taking care of the earth, is that each time you come back to seeing more for yourself, you feel more connected to all living things. Like I've been walking a lot as my exercise, and every time I walk, I'm listening to the audio tapes I have of Sydney Banks. And every time I drop into that feeling, and where I walk, there's trees and a creek and other people. And in that feeling, that moment of feeling, I can look at the trees and feel one. I could see the aliveness of the life around me. Now, if you listen that way to the world, you start to take care of the world you're in, because you feel the oneness of being connected to all of that. Because you see, as Sid says, all life is this spiritual energy. This spiritual energy is before anything physical. So the earth too is part of this spiritual energy. And if you really catch on to the depth of that, that oneness you feel, all of you feel, when you get a moment of that insight or that feeling of being part of mind, that feeling of love, or that feeling of going beyond who you are, you must feel like you're connected to everything. And if humankind can live in that, we would take care of the planet. We would take care of other living things. You see, it would just come out because we're at that level of consciousness. So I think talk about the purity of the principles, because it gets us into what we've been blessed to move away from, and that is judging people's insights. And the community, I think, has really gone away from that, and that's beautiful because it's given a nurturance to it's just coming old. Okay, so you can't be thinking about purity, but you can be thinking that there is so much more to see. There is so much more to see, and no one, I don't care who it is, has really seen it all. No one. I think Sid has, and even he would say, "Thought it's about the." But he calms us, but they're missing. So the way you take ways of what's being presented about the principles is to see that came from an insight in that person. And you want to listen for the feeling of the insight. If you're touched by that, then you take the direction they're pointing to and move inside and let it percolate and bring you your glimpse. Don't follow their glimpse. Don't follow my glimpse. Really. Use it to see if it wakes up anything for you, and then live from there, you see. And that has always, that's what's helped me. That's what's helped me. And I didn't know this at first, in the 1990s, that's when Sid said, stop your certification program. You're not teaching what I have seen at all. You're not teaching the principles. And I thought, oh my God, it didn't feel good, but I had to go back to not knowing and becoming a student again. But that opened me up to a deeper level of understanding. And now I see what Sid was saying is that there is just so much more to see, even about thought. That's key for us today, because I think it's easy for people to say, oh, I got thought. I got thought. I got it. You don't. So much to see about. Now we've got some real insights into your insights, and they've helped me tremendously. That are not principles. They're not. Idea you can have about thought, like I talk about, like my insight was that our feelings, we make up our feelings, and then thought creates feelings. Now that's a beautiful insight. You see, it's a glimpse of thought, but it's not the principles. It's just my idea. So if you go about practicing my idea, you're not going to stay open to seeing something for yourself from the principles. So they're good. They're really, I mean, like, you can't beat, you know, what's out there from people's insights into their understanding of this knowledge we carry around. But you don't want to live the concepts or the ideas. You want to just be grateful that you heard them, and then use them to find your way to your understanding of these principles. So that was a long answer to Bob, and it moved me away from my second topic, but I hope it helped you, because I feel alive about that topic. I don't know how to share it completely well yet, you know, in the way that I'd like to share it. I have to keep reflecting on it. I talked about it with George and Linda Pransky when I visited them 3 months ago, and I'm still forming a way to share what I just shared with you. But I got the opportunity to share it here, so I hope it made sense for people. Anybody got questions about that? Anybody want to share something that came to them when I was talking? I'd love to hear some feedback. It'll help me.
Hey, Mark.
Oh, and then is it Kristen?
Yeah.
Then we'll go to you. So Alan, and then Kristen.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark.
Did it make sense, Alan?
It really did. And your feed was kind of breaking up, but every time you came through, it was like the perfect thing. It really made a lot of sense. And what I heard was, well, I like what you said about the judgment piece, where, you know, if we're noticing ourselves moving in that direction, we're not experiencing that oneness. We're not living, we're in our heads at that point. And what I love about the principles, and what I'm discovering about them every day more and more, is there is such a simplicity to the understanding, but a vast depth and richness, which is what you said when it comes to exploring. And it's never ending. And you look to your life, and you look to where you're feeling it, where you're getting it, and then when you're not. And where you're not is where you further explore. And that simplicity, and recognizing that if you are getting into concepts, again, you're going in the wrong direction, because it is so simple. So that was beautiful, and just thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, and that's beautiful to see. Kristen, but I did a half-day talk here in the area on post-traumatic stress disorder, and we had people that worked with the veterans and all of that. And there was a beautiful feeling in the room, and somebody said, "Can I come?" And I thought, oh, the feeling's great. Why not? You know? So they come up, and they're sharing their understanding of principles, and they're making this drawing. Now, the drawing was like, what? I couldn't make any sense of the drawing at all, you know? How's that the principle? But what they shared from made sense. I could see they understood. And so again, you know, the concepts are ways people are trying to express, but the feeling they're in, and you get the feeling they're in, and you listen to that will touch you. Yeah. And it is simple. There is a simplicity. I mean, Sid, to me, sounded pretty practical, like saying it's just love and understanding. He says, if you get into a low mood, just have courage to see that you're Kristen, do you want to unmute yourself and share?
Okay. Yeah, yeah, I was having a hard time with the chopping, the feed coming in and out, but as well, I think that's sort of part of the lesson as well. Just being okay with that and just trusting what needed to come through would come through. And I guess it really points to, you know, the words not being what you need to focus on. that, you know, trust that, you know, it's the feeling coming through. But there were definitely things in your words that were sparking things in me, and it's a bit of a soup right now. So I'm not sure if I can put it into my words, but it was something that a quality that I don't remember picking up after I've listened to so many people speak, like lots of videos and radio shows and reading. And there was definitely something in what you were saying, and about part of it was about the piece of no one being more holy than anyone else, and that definitely was one of the messages that really brought a lot out in me. And yeah, and just, I guess, coming to terms with the fact that in whatever community, like I'm a bodywork natural health practitioner as well, and it just seems in so many of these realms that the ego always gets in the way, and there is this my way is better than your way, and it was very good to hear you speak the way you're speaking about it, because it's yeah, I guess it gave me an understanding of human nature, and that is the way we seem to work, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Yeah, our message can still come through, I guess.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you all put up with the static, and it looks like you gave that static in the connection the benefit of the doubt, and that didn't let it rent space in your mind. Thank you for that. I didn't want that to be a distraction. I didn't know that was happening. Yeah, you know, I think there's a deeper understanding than our way's the best way, the innocent way we learn to go about life, you know, and get into school or trainings or different kinds of approaches that we use and things like that. I remember the ultimate way that I saw that. I mean, I wasn't at all connected to the principles at that time, but I went to a conference on a particular approach to therapy, and the research presented, and people presenting the research almost got into a physical fight with somebody who was saying that's wrong. This is the way, this is the right way. You know, so you can see that when we get into the human vulnerability, because of that level of consciousness, to live in there being a right way and a wrong way and things like that, that judgmental frame, that it can lead to extreme conflicts. But it's beautiful to see there's a level of consciousness that human beings can find where that doesn't exist. Conflict doesn't exist. But what exists instead is compassion, love, generosity, you know, and a deep feeling of connection, and an allowance for separate realities, you see? Because you're not going to get away from separate realities, because as long as we're in physical form, everyone's creating a different reality they're living in moment to moment. You see, but living at a higher level of understanding, you embrace differences, you allow room for differences. And that's the beauty and the hope. See, that's the hope I wanted to share today, that every human being can find that level of consciousness. Now, whether they do or not, that's different. but that can be available is the hope, because it will end that level where people can look at being right to the point that leads to a physical conflict, right? Right? And I didn't mean it that way. So that's the hope. That's the hope of what I wanted to share today. Anybody else? Bob?
I really get your point about going back to Sid. And Sid's the purest. Sorry.
I think your dog has a question.
I think they're going outside.
That's what they wanted.
Let's see if I can remember what I was thinking here.
Okay, Bob.
What I was thinking, I was going back to Sid, and like Marty and I, a lot of times, one of us will say, gee, we need a Sid fix. And then we'll go back and watch a Sid video or, read one of his books or something like that. But in sharing the principles with others, it's hard to know exactly what the best way to share it with is, to have the impact on people so that they really want to, go learn more for themselves. And obviously a lot of it is how you are and how you come across, and whether they see the peace and love and less of stress and stuff like that in you, and they get that feeling of love that comes with being around people that understand the principles. And that's kind of attractive. But to just say, well, there are these three principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, and then they say, well, what are these? And you say, well, they're formless and you can't really describe them. And a lot of times, I know like in coaching, it's one-on-one, and it's so much easier to just listen and see where people are coming from. And then you can kind of really connect and go from there. But in sharing with a group, like say you go out and you have like 40 people that you're giving a talk to, I just wonder what the best way to share was that would have the impact. And a lot of it seems to be, well, these are the results you get by learning the three principles and the implications. And then some people will get interested from that. But and the other thing is, I could never really understand how it's really simple. And how do you have like a 4-day program or something talking about the principles when it's really simplicity itself? I'll be quiet now and hear what you have to say.
Well, I'll speak to one part of that, Bob. And, it's one of the reasons that I offer people the opportunity for the applications group, because I think you said it. I think that in presenting this understanding to anyone, whether it's individually or to a group, it's difficult to start with sharing the principles. It's more about starting to help people see something about life that that might be closer to their being able to see something, like, how to handle a difficult person in your life or something like that, And like Kathy Kissy loves to say, and back into the principles with people. But I can't say enough about the connection to either the group or the individual is what guides how you talk about it. I just can't say enough about that. Because until that you get that, whether it's a group or an individual, you're sharing from your assumptions of what they need or what they'd like to hear. So that's why when I talk about listening, it encompasses more than just listening to people, but really getting into a state of mind or a consciousness where you really can hear the other person or the group. And so sometimes when you're invited to participate in a group, you don't really start with that guidance, but you start with your best guess of what feels right to you right now. What point are you seeing really clearly about life and about whatever that's going on with you? And you start there. So it might be about how to communicate with understanding. It might be something that is alive for you, and you start there. But then you want to hear from people. You want to start to listen to the group. Because nothing is more powerful than the guidance when you're really connected and hearing the humanness of other people that are either in a group or individually meeting with you. Because at that moment, I mean, the understanding of why that's so powerful is that you're really trying to move away from Bob or Mark in your mind to this kind of pure consciousness of mind, you know? I mean, you're always mind, okay? But you're just trying to get out of your own thinking so you can hear that and feel that connection so that the intelligence there guides you. That's why you can be really effective in sharing the principles with the group. That's why you can get in your mind not to go there, not to present all three principles, just talk about this level. That's what's guiding you. And that's what I see as the power of listening, finding some way, whether it's a group or an individual, to get into that space in you with other people. So then you're not doing the guidance. Bob, you're not doing it. Mark isn't doing it. Energy to guide us. And it really shows us what's right.
Yeah, we see that in our, like Marty and I each have 3 principles groups that we kind of facilitate. And we may start sharing something or just show a short video or something like that. And then something clicks and somebody will say something, and then it goes from there. And you never know which person's really going to be the one that jumps in and kind of leads the group from there. But it's like you say, it's all the feeling, and some of those are just magical. You just come out of there feeling, total love for everybody and everything. It's, but like you say, you just start out with something and then kind of see where it goes, where wisdom kind of takes you. It's really neat.
Well, it's beautiful when you drop into that with other people that you're wanting to share this understanding with. It's this beautiful experience. And you may see things you hadn't thought of before about how to share. Bonnie, how are we doing with time?
If you want to keep going and people have questions, I'm fine.
Is it still staticky?
Your internet is popping in and out a little bit.
I'm just so sorry about that. Maybe, can we put a note maybe on this video? Don't get caught up in the staticness. There's some good words of wisdom later in the video. So they hang out in the video. I'm sorry about that. I don't know. The bars on here that show my connection are full. So I don't know what it could be. We've had a lot of rainy storms here. Maybe that has been playing with, I don't know, the cosmic vibes in some way. Well, let's take one more question or sharing if there is one. And then we could come to a close. Anybody else want to share something with us? Well, then, Bonnie, I think we could wrap it up then. I just want to share my appreciation for being invited to do a webinar and to see all of you here on the webinar in person, and hope it's helpful to everyone who's going to view the video.
Thank you so much, Mark. It really was wonderful. I really appreciate everything that you said. And I, the static was a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. So I think we got.
Oh, great. Oh, great.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to thank everybody who's on live, and also announce that the next 3PGC webinar is on March 9th with Shal and Hannah Rosenblatt. And that should be a really great one too. So it's same time, 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon Eastern time on March 9th. Thank you all so much.
All right, everybody. See you later. Bye.
Thank you.